Welcome back, everyone. Today we're exploring a book with a title that immediately makes you stop and think. The Hunger Was the Compass. It's a new novel by author and spiritual teacher Richard Ravenbrook, and the subtitle tells us quite a bit about where we're headed. A Christian mystic's journey beyond the walls of religion into the wild divine.
And I think that word hunger is important, because Ravenbrook isn't really talking about physical hunger. He's talking about spiritual hunger. That feeling that says, there must be something more.
Exactly. And there's a line associated with the book that captures the entire idea beautifully. The hunger was never the enemy. It was the compass.
That's what we're going to explore today. What happens when a person who genuinely believes in God begins questioning the religious system that taught him about God? Does questioning mean you're losing your faith? Or could questioning actually be the beginning of a deeper faith?
Let's start with the basic premise. The Hunger Was the Compass follows a man who was raised within Christianity. He was taught what to believe. He was taught how to worship. He was taught where God could be found. And, perhaps just as importantly, he was taught where God supposedly could not be found.
Which is something a lot of people can probably relate to. Religious traditions don't simply give us beliefs. They often give us boundaries. This is acceptable. That's forbidden. This is holy. That's dangerous. This comes from God. That doesn't.
Exactly. But the character begins experiencing something many spiritual seekers eventually encounter. The answers he's inherited no longer satisfy the questions growing inside him. And that's where the hunger begins.
And I want to make something clear here. He's not hungry to abandon God. He's hungry to know God more deeply. That's a very different thing.
And that's probably one of the most interesting aspects of the book, because the journey isn't really from belief to unbelief. It's a journey from inherited belief toward experienced spirituality.
There's a fascinating question underneath this story. Why are people sometimes frightened by spiritual questions?
Because questions can disrupt certainty. If you've spent your entire life believing that you already possess all the answers, asking a serious question can feel threatening.
Especially when that question becomes, what if something I was taught isn't completely true?
Right. And Ravenbrook seems to be making an important distinction throughout his broader work. There is a difference between questioning God and questioning what human beings have told us about God.
That's huge, because human beings interpret Scripture. Human beings build churches. Human beings create denominations. Human beings establish religious traditions.
And human beings can make mistakes.
Exactly. So questioning a human interpretation doesn't automatically mean rejecting the divine. It might simply mean that you're searching for truth.
And that brings us to the phrase Christian mystic. Some listeners may wonder what that actually means.
Mysticism is essentially concerned with experiencing the divine personally, rather than only understanding God intellectually. The mystic doesn't simply want someone to describe the sacred. The mystic wants to encounter it.
And Christian mysticism isn't some modern invention. Christian history contains contemplatives, visionaries, monastics, healers, and others who sought direct experiences of the divine.
And in The Hunger Was the Compass, that search begins taking the character outside familiar religious boundaries. Nature becomes important. Silence becomes important. Mystery becomes important. Personal experience becomes important.
There's almost this realization. Wait a minute. Maybe God isn't confined to the places I've been told are sacred.
Maybe the forest can become a cathedral.
Maybe sitting beside a river can become prayer.
Maybe watching the sunrise can become worship.
And maybe experiencing wonder can itself become a spiritual practice.
Now we have to address the elephant in the room, because Richard Ravenbrook doesn't stop at Christian mysticism. His work also explores Christian witchcraft and magic.
And that's where some readers are going to become uncomfortable.
Absolutely. But maybe being uncomfortable isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes discomfort forces us to examine why we believe what we believe.
Ravenbrook's approach repeatedly challenges the assumption that the word witch automatically means evil. Instead, he asks readers to examine ideas like wisdom, nature, intention, ritual, personal spiritual practice, healing, and our relationship with the divine.
And that's an important distinction. We're not talking about abandoning ethics. Quite the opposite. Ethics become essential. Intent matters. Responsibility matters. Compassion matters. Discernment matters.
Which creates another fascinating question. Can a person explore mystical or magical practices while maintaining a relationship with Christ?
Ravenbrook's answer is essentially, don't begin with fear. Begin with examination. Study, question, discern, and decide whether something brings you closer to love, wisdom, compassion, truth, and the divine.
There's another phrase from the book's subtitle that I really like, the wild divine.
I do too, because it suggests something enormous, a God who cannot be contained.
Exactly. Human beings love categories. We build theological boxes. We create definitions. We develop doctrines. Then sometimes we begin acting as though the infinite creator of existence must remain inside those definitions.
But what if God is bigger than our theology?
What if God is bigger than Christianity?
Or bigger than any religion?
That's the provocative territory this book enters. Not necessarily that religion is worthless, but that religion may be a path toward the divine, rather than a container capable of possessing the divine.
That's an important distinction, and it fits with much of Ravenbrook's philosophy. The idea that truth should ultimately move us toward unity rather than division. And the hunger was the compass doesn't exist in isolation. Richard Ravenbrook has built a fairly substantial body of work around these ideas.
Yes, his writing has explored Christian witchcraft, mysticism, spiritual independence, religious trauma, personal transformation, unity, world peace, and the relationship between institutional religion and personal spirituality.
And his books have also begun receiving recognition. Several of Ravenbrook's works have received literary and independent publishing honours, including recognition through the Bookie Awards.
One particularly fitting example is The Ravenbrook Flame, which received recognition as Most Uplifting Book. And that makes sense when you look at the larger philosophy behind Ravenbrook's writing. Again and again, the emphasis comes back to transformation, spiritual freedom, personal responsibility, compassion, and unity.
His work surrounding unity has also received recognition, including the Unity Manifesto. And beyond individual books, Ravenbrook himself has received recognition connected with personal development and his work as an author.
But what's interesting is that the different books don't feel completely disconnected from one another. They seem to be pieces of one larger conversation.
A conversation asking, how do human beings move beyond fear? How do we stop allowing religion to divide us? How do we respect different spiritual paths? How do we find the divine for ourselves? And ultimately, Who do we become when we're no longer afraid to seek?
And if you're discovering Richard Ravenbrook's work for the first time, there are several books that illustrate different sides of that journey. There's The Christian Witch Journey, which explores the movement from fear, tradition, and dogma toward personal divine empowerment.
Then there's The Christian Witch's Path, Top Questions Answered, which takes a more practical approach to questions surrounding faith, mysticism, and ethical witchcraft.
There's also The Healer of Bethany, a novel centered around faith, healing, compassion, and courage.
And now we have The Hunger Was the Compass. And I think this new book occupies an interesting place among them, because it's really about the seeker, the person standing between the world they've inherited and the spiritual world they're beginning to discover.
Let's return to that word, hunger, because I think it's the heart of the entire book.
Have you ever felt spiritually hungry?
Absolutely. And I think most people who take spirituality seriously eventually experience it. It's that feeling when the answers that once satisfied you don't anymore.
And that can be terrifying.
Especially if you've been taught that questioning equals rebellion.
But what if it doesn't? What if spiritual hunger isn't evidence that something has gone wrong?
What if it's evidence that something is beginning?
That's the idea I keep coming back to. We often treat doubt like the opposite of faith, but sometimes doubt is what forces faith to grow.
Borrowed beliefs are easy. Someone hands them to you, you accept them. Personal conviction is different. You have to wrestle with it, question it, test it, experience it.
And sometimes lose parts of it.
Absolutely, because spiritual growth isn't always about accumulating more beliefs. Sometimes it's about having the courage to release beliefs that no longer survive honest examination.
So let's talk directly to the person listening right now. Maybe you're questioning. Maybe Christianity remains important to you, but traditional religion no longer feels like home. Maybe you're curious about mysticism. Maybe you're exploring nature-based spirituality. Maybe you've encountered words like witchcraft or magic, and you're trying to separate historical fear from what people actually practice.
Or maybe you don't identify with any of those things. Maybe you're simply searching.
Then perhaps the central message of this book is worth considering. Don't automatically fear the hunger. Listen to it.
But don't blindly follow everything either. Question. Study. Use discernment. Remain compassionate. Remain humble enough to say, I could be wrong.
And perhaps most importantly, don't replace one rigid dogma with another. Spiritual freedom requires responsibility.
If we strip away all the labels, Christianity, witchcraft, mysticism, religion, what is The Hunger Was the Compass really about?
I think it's about permission.
Interesting. Explain that.
Permission to ask. Permission to wonder. Permission to explore. Permission to admit you don't know. Permission to seek God outside the boundaries other people established for you. And ultimately, permission to discover who you are spiritually.
I'd add one more. Permission to change.
Yes, because the person who begins a spiritual journey shouldn't necessarily be the same person who reaches the next stage of it. Otherwise, what was the journey for?
Richard Ravenbrook's newest book is The Hunger Was the Compass, a Christian mystic's journey beyond the walls of religion into the wild divine.
It's a novel about faith, magic, mysticism, questioning, transformation, and the courage to seek the divine beyond the boundaries we've inherited.
But perhaps its message can be condensed into something much simpler. Maybe you're not lost because you're questioning.
Maybe you're finally searching.
Maybe the restlessness isn't your enemy.
Maybe the questions aren't your enemy.
Maybe the longing isn't your enemy.
Because sometimes the thing that makes us leave the familiar road
is the very thing that leads us toward the path we're supposed to discover.
The hunger was never the enemy.
It was the compass.
The Hunger Was the Compass by Richard Ravenbrook. Until next time, keep asking questions.
Keep seeking truth.
Honor the mystery.
And wherever your path leads,
walk it with courage.